All right. Welcome, everyone, to this unmute discussion. My name is Emily Rosowski,
And
and this
I'm
is
Zena
Zena.
Island.
And we are the co founders of Unmute, which is the company helping companies and organizations really rethink the way that they approach racial issues within their organizations. We work right at that intersection of marketing and policy. And one of the core tenets of our work is actually that we drive forward hard conversations so that we can begin to understand a team's perspective. So, all people on a team, and then work through whatever blocks we have in trying to show up and work collaboratively. From there, we move into all sorts of deliverables and consulting practices that both Zena and I, um, you know, get to work with big companies like Procter and Gamble and Google and so on around. So this is a snippet of how we would navigate a conversation, especially a really pertinent topic around race, COVID, and vaccines. So hopefully you are in a place where you can completely receive this information. You're strapped in somewhere, hopefully seated somewhere that feels safe and comfortable. Zena and I are going to dive into some topics that will certainly most likely kick up some emotional reactions for those who are listening. So that is just one of the things that we're going to navigate together and hopefully provide some tools. So
And
with
also, this is
that,
the first of many discussions we're going to have. The first one, as Emily mentioned, is COVID and vaccines. We're going to dive into that conversation because since this is a hot topic, it's also a racial one and a politicized one as well. So we're going to talk about that, but we're also going to be talking about in the future other topics related to race, especially inside the workplace and these type of topics that come up amongst your coworkers.
yeah, and the last thing I'll say before we dive into this is that Zena and I, our goal is about inclusion and really coming to a place of understanding. So the reason we're doing this is not to be divisive. It's not to create more separation. It's actually to bring people together. And so the first stage of doing that is really just creating that visibility and that vulnerability within communities, within people. So we're going to hopefully mirror that work by example through navigating this interesting discussion. So with that, Zena, I want to kick this off a little bit with just the general topic of what has been going on with COVID. You and I both had very different experiences that were very racially, through the lens of race, really different. And so I want to hear from you about like what was that experience like? I know there were some things going on with you and your family.
So, as you know, Emily, my father ended up with COVID, and I had a horrendous experience with the whole from part from moving him from his assisted living, getting him into a hospital to get tested, to getting treatment and care. And if it weren't for the fact my father was in the state of Michigan, and I have relationships there. I'm not quite sure if he would have survived it. And I know so many people who went through this as well, who had loved ones in nursing homes, memory care facilities, and also senior citizen living facilities and assisted living. So I suspected my father had COVID. He was not himself. We were talking on the phone. He just was not himself. Later on, I started questioning the assisted living. Can we get him tested? They were like, no, we don't have any kits. Meanwhile, to be honest with you, somebody else did get tested there. And I knew that from somebody else who was a white resident and found out she had COVID and she was isolated, but my father couldn't get tested. So we went through some back and forth conversations. Eventually, I had to call a friend of mine who is a physician, who I went to University of Michigan with, and there's a reason why I'm saying this. And I gave her all the symptoms that I thought he had. My sister-in-law, who was a nurse, was able to get inside the facility because you were not allowed to go in unless you were a medical professional. and she went in to see him because he had fallen a few times. And she took his temperature and she was like, he has a temperature, had all the signs and symptoms. And the only way I got my dad out of there was through this friend and connection. Because at that particular time, you had to have doctor's permission to go into an ER or even into a hospital because they were overloaded, beds were full to capacity, and they were turning people away. And that's why so many people died. And eventually, he ended up at University of Michigan Hospital, and I really had to pull out my credentials of I went to school there, undergrad and graduate. I went to the School of Public Health, which is connected to the hospital. And after that, you're talking about the way I was treated from that point on, phone calls from all his doctors, nurses, anybody who touched my father, they called, gave me an update. They allowed our family to call the floor. Also, they put my father also suffers from the beginning stages of dementia at that particular time. It's advanced now, and they put a sitter in his room. So it was just amazing how I didn't feel privileged at the time, but I felt privileged later on once I dropped that I was a graduate of University of Michigan. But I hear these stories from so many other Black people who have said they couldn't get in, they didn't know what was going on, and then the next minute they know they get a phone call and they find out that their loved one is dead, and there was nothing that they could do about it. It broke my heart because I know exactly of what they felt. And that's what causes the distrust in the healthcare system, because the way Black people are treated, the way we are turned away when we say there's something wrong with us. You even look at Serena Williams, her situation. If she had not fought the doctors and she had not been who she was, she might not be here today. And this is a common story over and over and over again.
So, what I just want to reinforce and highlight and just underscore is that that sort of story is literally, I've literally never heard that from someone who is white. And so I say that not because I want to create a separation, but because I think there's an important part of recognizing that, okay, I don't have that experience. And I actually will talk about my experience of this, which is so different. And that's an experience that you had many times in different capacities. And so sometimes it's hard to wrap our heads around if we don't have that experience. Like it was hard at first for me to be like, wait, really? This is like a thing? When I was first starting to learn about like inequity in our healthcare system, I was like, what? No, that's not possible. Because every experience I've ever had at the doctor's office is like they listen to me and they listen to the things I say and I feel whatever, maybe not every, but like majority of them, right? And anytime that I don't feel listened to, it's I don't necessarily think too much of it. I think, oh, okay, the doctor's busy or whatever. Now, hearing consistently time and time and time and time again, like that's a pattern. That's something that continues to show up in articles, in literature, in conversation. And so it creates a sense of, I could imagine, like in people who look like me, like a lack of understanding. And so that creates like a sense of, well, why are you freaking out about that? Like, well, maybe it was just the doctor, or maybe it was just the nurse, or maybe that we constantly are thinking about ways to justify those actions, which like from my perspective continues to create a wedge between how much you trust me and how much like I think I know what you're saying or how much I trust you. So there's like this disconnect that happens if there's not the deeper understanding.
I'm going to add to that too. A lot of people don't know this because I don't talk about it often, but my background is in healthcare administration and also in public health. I studied this in graduate school at Michigan. And that's how they knew I knew what was going on, because I said, we're across the street from the hospital. There is just a gateway that separates between the School of Public Health and the hospital. So they knew they knew I was telling the truth. The problem is because of the fact I studied this, and also health inequity. I studied health inequity and also studied the health disparities. And I also saw it throughout the years that I've worked in healthcare as a public relations expert, as in communications, and also having this background in healthcare, I actually saw this going on. And so when the headlines read, Black people are dying from COVID because of underlying conditions and putting the blame on us, that is not our fault. It's because of the fact that the way the healthcare system is built, number one, it's hard for anybody to navigate. It's hard for the average non-Black person to figure it out. It's difficult. Number two, we don't have access to care the way we should. Cultural competency is, lacks with these doctors, and you really have to have a health advocate to to speak on your behalf in order to, I hate saying this, fight the system. And the reason why Black people have high blood pressure, diabetes, all of these different diseases and health conditions is because we just don't have the access to treatment and care that we should have as in comparison to other population groups. So
Well,
that's where it's a history in all of this. It just didn't start with COVID.
so there's two things I want to highlight. Number one is the amount of strength that you had to go through to get your father in the right care, and the amount of persistence. Like, I remember that day when you were managing all of that, it was like constant calls, like you were constantly pushing and moving things forward. Like, that takes a tremendous amount of emotional toll. And obviously, all people who have loved ones in the hospital have an emotional toll for sure. But the amount that I saw you like having to like move and shake on top of all the emotional crap you had to deal with your father being sick and everything was insane. I've never experienced that. And I've had plenty of family members in the hospital. And number two, and by the way, there's that story of all the things that you know to be true from your lived experiences in the past that's like influencing the way that both parties are showing up, right? It's the story that people at the hospital have about people who are Black, and it's people who are Black who have the story about people at the hospital. That's also creating a divide that, is obviously a challenge. And the second point I want to just address head on, because I know that this is a bias or just a thing that people have, and it might come off in a way that's triggering, but I really want to unpack it because it is that way. When you see people who are Black not wearing masks appropriately or not walking around appropriately, the tendency might be to say, well, that's why they're getting COVID so much, or that's why, or they're not taking responsibility for themselves. I just want to ask that every person who is not having a lived experience as a Black person takes a second and asks themselves if absolutely everything you've ever been taught about the health system, the government, and anything that's supporting you in that way, that's the media, anything that is supporting you, quote unquote, is that they aren't looking out for you, they're corrupt, and it's not actually something that's benefiting you, why the hell would you wear a mask? They suck. Like, why the hell would you listen? Why the hell would you do these things? Or I guess you would, because obviously you care, but like, there's so many steps to take to overcome that. Like, absolutely, I understand why someone would or wouldn't want to take that action, or they wouldn't feel as totally aligned to the mandates and stuff that are coming down from systems that, by the way, have always favored and supported people who look like me. So I think that one's so important to unpack, because I hear that. I hear it, I observe it, I witness it in myself, having to check myself and be like, whoa, Emily, stop. That is an unconscious bias. Like, respect and honor this person's experience. And also, by the way, it's okay that I still wear a mask. So like, I think that one's an important one to unpack too.
It is an important one. But the thing about it is, there were Black people not wearing masks, there were white people not wearing masks. I think for Black people, it was a different reasons from white people. I think white people was more so, I'm not gonna have, and I'm not white, so I'm just going based on.
And I'm not Black, so I don't know.
But,
I'm just
but it's a government interfering with their lives. This is a hoax. I know we had a president, and not to get into, I don't want to get politics into this, but it was politicized a lot. Okay. And then for Black people, whether they decided to wear a mask or not, there were different reasons and issues behind all that. All right. Because it did take us, there was once a myth saying that, COVID was only white people were getting it. I'm not kidding you. That's at one point, that was the myth. I'm not kidding you. That was a myth. And then eventually
And
Now that's why we weren't wearing masks in the beginning. And then after a while, when we started hearing more Black people were getting it, we started wearing our masks and we were being more careful. So it was so many different myths out there and that were going on. And then on top of it, you have all of these, but this belief system that, that people are not supporting you, the system is not
yeah,
supporting you, white, the healthcare is not for you, the government is not for you. You have all these different institutions where you feel like they're against you. Well, what do you
right.
think is going to happen? Which, this is why we got a problem right now with vaccines. So,
Right. I mean, I think the one thing I'll just say on that too is, there is a component of this. Sorry, I paused there for a second. My internet was like, what? There is a component of this where each person's understanding and trust of these systems comes from their experience with individuals who represent those systems. So your experience with the individual doctors, your experience with the individual government employees, your experience with the individual systems and healthcare workers, and all of these things. And so the trust that we're looking to create happens on a one-to-one level, as well as just what your communities tell you and support around you. So it's not just like, hey, I'm going to all of a sudden trust this new system. It's like, uh, I think sometimes when I think about this, I'm like, well, course I trust these systems because like my experience personally has always been positive. I have a family member who's a cop. I have a family member who's a doctor. Like they would never intentionally go out and hurt someone or not listen to someone. I think it's hard when we see people who look like us in these systems and we can easily identify with their lived experience, and it makes us trust that more. So I think there's also this understanding of like visually what are you seeing in the world and what spaces are for you and what aren't for you, and how do you just, I'm not saying create crazy action. I'm saying just be aware of that
be
lens
aware.
so
Right.
that we can sit down and be like, oh, when Zena is telling me about her father's situation, Emily, I got to be really aware in like the way that I'm showing up, because if I want to be a supportive friend, business partner, like, which I want to do, I think we all just want to have connection. Like I have to show up in a way that has a deeper level of understanding to actually create connection. And so what we're being asked to do in these moments is go deeper into ourselves and our own stuff, so that on the other side of it, we can just examine like how do we show up and connect with each other and create like, you know, a sense of connection. That's where I live on it.
Well, also, Emily, when I was telling you all of this is interesting. Your experience with your grandmother was the opposite. So I had
So
no idea at the time when I was sharing all this with you, and you were like, "What? Huh? Are you kidding me?" And so your grandmother went through the very
exact
similar
same
experience, but her outcome was
thing.
different.
So my grandmother was at a nursing home. Everyone was getting tested regularly. Now you could sit there and say, well, it's because you had her in a different nursing home and it was a higher facility. No, like the nursing homes that Zena and I have selected, we are similar, like socioeconomic band. We're looking for the same sorts of things. We have this, we've had conversations about this because of just our lives are similar. So like equitable facilities where people were getting tested, and we were proactively told that my grandmother at the time was not feeling so great. So they were proactively testing these patients. Now, I will say there was not, I went and visited my grandmother once, and I don't think there was a single person of color in her nursing home. She also lived in Cape Cod. So, like, that's,
Right.
it's
Demographic. Hmm.
but I think that's important to note, right? So, like, I don't have that extra added note of like, was there a person of color who was getting support in that nursing home? I don't know what that would have been like, but she was getting proactively tested. We got a call from the hospital or from the nursing home. She had been taken to the hospital, like gone through all the tests, moved to another facility. We were so kept in the loop. It was literally insane. Like the person who was like the head of the nursing facility was calling my mom every day. We were getting texts. It was like literally the most insane like engagement and support. Not once did we even question the like efficacy. Not once did we question if we were being listened to or like if my mom's directions were being taken. It didn't even cross our mind. And so part of this is we've never been told. I've never been told not to trust the systems or that I need to push extra hard. And I've also never had the experience. So it was literally night and day between Zena and I's engagement, which is crazy. Yeah. So that was what's happening.
Absolutely crazy. And so, of course, I thought, this is why Black people feel the way they do. And, this is why COVID, hit us, not just because it hit us harder physically, but it also hit us harder emotionally, to deal with this, because the way we were treated throughout this entire time. And my heart, like I said, and I'll keep saying, my heart bleeds for the folks who try to get their loved ones tested, try to get their loved ones treatment, try to see my heart bleeds for them. And I know exactly what they went through. So it's a tale of two different experiences, one Black, one white. And as far as I'm concerned, the experience that I went through with my dad is a common one. Is a very common one. So, and
I'm
that's
gonna
why people with Unmute, I'm gonna add this one other thing. That's why with Unmute, when you see people coming into the workplace, and especially Black people, they're carrying an extra, some of them, not all, I'm gonna say some of us are, the ones I've talked to, even being on Zoom, they're carrying this extra layer of, it's just weight on them. And it's the weight of COVID. It's the weight of your loved ones. It's the weight of not being able to see them. It's the weight of the healthcare system. It's the weight of racism. And then George Floyd happened. And that was a whole nother layer. And, we were coming into, trying to still show up with a smile on our faces and trying to do our work, whether it was in Zoom or whether you were in person. And all this was going on around us. And I'm not saying feel sorry for us. I'm just saying just be aware.
Yeah, I
Be
think
aware.
that was the thing I was going to point on, is that if our end goal is deeper connection, a deeper sense of understanding, ultimately in a workplace to actually get stuff done, really cool, amazing things, that if there is a friction between a lack of understanding, a friction point is created because of a lack of understanding, or even just a lack of acknowledgement that, like, oh, there's something here that I don't quite understand, it can literally divide us more. And so I truly believe that we have not been taught how to manage these shifts in emotions in order to find symbiosis, because truly, I talk to a lot of white people, right? And it's like, oh, we don't know what to say. We don't know how to show up. And like, I understand that that sounds really freaking annoying because we should be educating ourselves, sure. But I will tell you, it doesn't matter how much you read. Sometimes in that moment, when someone's going through a really hard thing, or like you can't even fathom what that feels like, it's tricky. And so the biggest thing that I will just offer up is like sitting, holding space, not trying to ask questions, just acknowledging like, okay, yeah, like I don't understand. And like, I know if you need a minute, okay. And ultimately, like just being a space where people, like, they can be themselves. They don't have to tell you everything, but just like open. And so that's not something you can intuit in your brain. It's something you have to practice. It's something you have to like feel in your body. It's a systematic practice. And so like that's the teachable to, is how to just like hold space. Because the holding of space, even just like a minute of that, that is literally the difference between a productive meeting and a productive project, and like creating extra friction and tension within the workplace, and then all these other things that fall down. And so in that moment of like, I don't know what the heck to do, or I'm scared, I don't know how to show up, I don't know how to be here, like, being open, being vulnerable, speaking from the heart, and just like being okay with whatever their emotional state might be, like that's work as far as I'm concerned. It's reading obviously is helpful, but like it's so much more than that. Like even if you know the whole historical context of racism, that doesn't help you show up with your teammate better.
Mhm.
You have to learn how to be okay with their emotions, like whatever they are, even if you don't have to understand them. Just like, wow, okay, yeah, you're feeling a lot, and I don't understand that, but that's okay. So cool. I'm here for you if you need anything. I'm here just to sit, need space, if you whatever. And at the same time, taking responsibility that like your own emotions, when someone, let me say it this way, and then I'm going to get off my soapbox. But I really think this is important for people who look like me to hear. If someone came to you and they were completely hysterically crying and just a complete bumbling mess, oh my God, this is just so hard. Would you sit there and tell them about your problems? No, you wouldn't. Now imagine that that same emotion is the same emotion that people who color are holding around every day. Let's just assume that. Not everyone, but like I just want to give a very stark example. Assume that that is what's happening, okay? You unloading your own shit onto them is not actually helping the situation. Now, if let me just change this around, you have supported that person, you've given them the space to cry, maybe you give them a tissue, whatever it is, let's assume it's that person, and you built up this sense of trust. And not that someone needs to have an emotional reaction, but just like you've given them what they need to feel okay, and they feel like that sense of trust, then maybe in the right context, you can actually have an honest discussion and learn how to manage your own stuff because you've developed a sense of alignment. And that's literally the only way that I've seen people get past this divide. So that's my soapbox.
And
To
then
add
I
what you
think I would like to add to this whole entire conversation. This has been good, Emily. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about this. I know that we've been holding these different discussions, and I know you've heard, we there's been a common thread with Black people and also white people and non-Black people. It's been a common thread and theme throughout, especially since George Floyd. Um, the one thing I would say to people, if you're having a bad day because the whole, it's just too much. We got a verdict that's getting ready to come out soon regarding the police officer who killed George Floyd. That's happening. And also, about the other three other videos that have come out as well of police brutality and police killings. Um, if that person seems, sometimes it's okay to tell people, I need a minute. It is fine to say, today is just not a good day for me. It's a lot going on in this world. And I just need a moment, and you don't maybe have to tell them exactly how you're feeling, but you can say, you know what, it's just a little bit too much going on right now. And I just need a moment. And because we try to hide our feelings, we try to suck it up and smile and, be that soldier. And sometimes it doesn't always work out that way because either you're going to blow up and get upset about something or it's going to impact your work. It is okay. And I'm learning to tell people, look, I need a minute. This is a lot of things have been triggering for me and I just need a second, and it's fine. And you never know, that person might be willing to talk to you about it so that they can either just support you or either for them to learn and understand. So
yeah, I think that's incredibly powerful. When I think about even just when we work with folks and they have a lot of emotion running through them, just allowing yourself to feel it is definitely productive. It can't always happen at work, right? But giving yourself even 5 minutes, we oftentimes tell people go to the bathroom, 5 minutes, take just a minute to collect yourself, not in a bad way, not like collect yourself, but like into the stuff so that it doesn't feel so charged. And you can actually have that conversation with your colleague. If you even just go like 2% into that emotion, 2%, not a lot, just whatever right at the surface, it can neutralize it enough so that you can tell your colleague, hey, I need a minute. And then you can take that time. So there's so many different tips and tricks and practices that, we definitely work with folks on unlocking. But I think without, completely overwhelming you, we'll kind of just leave it at that. And we'll pick this back up with the vaccine conversation in just a bit.
Other conversations as well.
Okay,
But
so
if you
let's
want
use
to
that
learn
as like
more about Unmute, come to our website at www.letsunmute.com. That's letsunmute.com. Check us out on our website and feel free to hit Emily or I up on Instagram. Emily's on there right now too because she's been talking about her new life that's going on. I'm not going to give it away right now because I
Yes.
don't. She's exploring her life, but hit us up on Instagram or LinkedIn. We're both there. if you just want to connect with us.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you think that these conversations might be helpful and you want to help your team actually learn how to manage these practices, go through the emotional depth of this conversation and get to a place of equity and really a space where people feel like they can manage what's going on in their lives in the office actively, then you should definitely check our website out and we'd be happy to work with you. We've got a lot of wonderful stories we can tell you about things we've done in the past and cannot wait to connect with you soon. So thank you everyone for
Yeah.
listening and we will okay.